Hello and welcome to the StartupBREW Fargo podcast. StartupBREW is a weekly event hosted by Emerging Prairie in downtown Fargo, where we believe that entrepreneurship is energized over brews. Each week, we bring entrepreneurs, founders, and innovators together because we believe they succeed when they have access to each other and the community that supports them. This week, we welcomed Craig Rupp with Sabanto, an autonomous agriculture company. Sabanto helps farmers deal with their labor problems by automating redundant operations. They've deployed multiple autonomous systems performing field operations in fields across the states. Let's listen in.
Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to, tell my story. So as Nathan mentioned, I'm Craig Rupp, and I started a company called Sabanto. And so I just want to go over a little, the history and I guess the trials and tribulations of starting my company and some of the things that I did. So it was 2018, and I had left the Climate Corporation, and I was, believe it or not, getting my PhD or chipping away at it. I had been doing that for the last couple years, and I decided that I'm going to go at it full time. And I guess, there was one day I was just thinking to myself about some of the farmers that I met and worked with in the past and how much labor is a problem for them. And so I decided one day that, I think autonomy is going to play a part in agriculture, and someone's going to do it, and that person's going to be me. So what I did was, believe it or not, I'm sitting in Ames, Iowa, and I went out and I bought an 18-row, 20-inch planter. And then what I did was I went out and bought, or actually leased, a 220 horsepower tractor. And a friend of mine and I decided that we're going to throw it on a semi-trailer, and we're going to go throughout the Midwest and start planting autonomously. So we were writing software and getting our CDL licenses, and in the spring of 2019, we loaded it on a truck, and the two of us started planting in Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Illinois, and Indiana. And when we came back from that, I will say the software that we wrote was alpha. There was a lot of problems with it. It's not like, I'll be honest with you, we couldn't trust the tractor or the planter, and we were watching it diligently. And about 90% of the time, someone was sitting in the seat just making sure, for safety. And then, meanwhile, I was traveling back and forth to San Francisco, meeting with venture capitalists to see if I could get some funding. And it turned out I did get funding over the summer of 2019. And that basically propelled me into, I better start building a team. So I went and hired 5 of the best guys that I knew. They were software guys, hardware guys, and ag engineers, and people who could help me build this platform. So I started an office in Chicago, and the first thing we did was we looked back at some of the problems that we had. Number one, it costs a lot to haul this equipment from point A to point B, and so the first thing we did was we downsized. And we started looking at some of these 60 horsepower Kubota tractors, and it turns out you can lease them for next to nothing. So give you an example. That 220 horsepower tractor, I was paying $5,000 a month just to have that, and whereas I could go lease these little Kubota tractors for on the order of $3,500 a year. And then, so what we did then is we took that 18-row, that large planter that I bought, and we chopped it up and made 4 smaller planters, 4 5-row planters. We went and bought 2 more row units. And then what we did was in 2019, we went out and, and it was nice because these smaller tractors, I didn't need a semi, and I could pull them with a 3/4 ton truck. And by the way, one of those little tractors is on the road right now on its way to Grand Farm. So we went out in 2020 with multiple rigs, 4 little tractors, and we deployed multiple tractors in the same field and started planting. And then when we came back, we started getting all these opportunities for some organic growers. And so what we did was we deployed those throughout the summer of 2020. We put cultivators on the back of these little 60 horsepower tractors and started cultivating throughout right around Bettendorf, Iowa. And it was fairly easy for us to throw these on a truck and move them there. And then the fall of 2019 or 2020 is when I finally started to see some light at the end of the tunnel, because we started doing tillage, and tillage is fairly easy, and these little tractors can run 24/7. And we deployed these little units throughout Illinois, and we put tillage rigs behind them, and we ran 37 hours nonstop with one of these little tractors. We did have to stop and refuel it, but the engine ran 37 hours nonstop. And then, the spring of this latest this spring. We got larger, and we started working with some growers who they have labor problems, and the first thing they want to do is they want to convert their operations over to autonomy. And we started working with some really large growers and started taking over some of their acres. So this last spring, there's a couple things we did. There was a farming operation with 750 acres, and we did every last acre. We planted and field cultivated every last acre in Missouri for this farm operation. They didn't even own a planter. And then what we did was we took over 1,000 acres from a farmer in Nebraska. He's an organic farmer, so labor is about 5 times a problem than your normal conventional farmer. And what we did was we rototilled, we field cultivated, we planted, we turned around and tine weeded, we rotary hoed, and then we cultivated every acre of that 1,000 acres 3 times. And then so that we were done by the June-July timeframe of this year, and then we started going out. And right now we have units in Iowa that are, and what we're doing is we're planting cover crops for them. There's a big push in the investment area about sustainability, and one of the problems that the farmers have is job number 1 for them is to harvest, and what they would like to do is they would like to rely on a third party such as us to plant cover crops to make their operations more sustainable. So that's what we're doing right now. There's a Q&A session. I have a lot of stories about some of the pitfalls. This is my 6th company, believe it or not. Startup that I've done, so I have a lot of battle scars and wounds and a lot of arrows in my back with a lot of the companies that I've started.
Good.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Craig.
After the presentation, we jumped into a live Q&A session with the audience, joined by our host, Nathan Marcotte from the Grand Farm team. Let's listen in.
So, Craig, maybe to kick us off, you were mentioning a few things you've done in the last year, but maybe what are you most proud of within the last year?
Probably what I'm most proud of is, the people that have assembled. There's this, I remember, I was told one time by my board of advisors that your first hires is going to set the culture of the company. And then I knew there were 3 or 4 guys that I knew that I worked with in the past that, they're fun to work around. They're really smart people. And I guess the fact that I could go out and convince these these four guys to leave their perfectly paying job and come join me and do this kind of crazy idea. And I actually got them to leave their job and come work for me, and it turned out to be probably the best advice I've ever gotten. And they set the culture of the company. You know, we're kind of radicals. We're out there. We're renegades going out there and, you know, performing these field operations autonomously. You know, sitting back in Chicago. I have some engineers sitting in Chicago monitoring these autonomous platforms running in Nebraska, for example. And it is kind of odd, you know, when you're laying in bed at 11:30 at night, looking at your cell phone, watching this little tractor out there toiling in the field, and these guys helped me pull that off.
Yeah, fantastic. So now we'll go to our audience. So if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. William. And I'll summarize that for our virtual audience. So it's really about what education is needed kind of all across the board. So for farmers, policymakers, to make autonomous farming possible.
Okay, so let's just start with the people in the ecosystem. So I have talked with Soon, your professor at North Dakota State University.
Dr. Rex Soon.
Yeah, Dr.
Yep.
Rex Soon. I've talked to Wendy Winterset, who's the president now of Iowa State. I've talked with University of Illinois, some professors there, Ohio State University, and I begged them that I think every person who gets an agronomy degree should take 2 semesters of programming. Most farmers that I know, they use their only programming experience they have is Excel. And if these guys just had a little bit of programming, I told you, you would not believe what's going to happen. I mean, if they had just the slightest amount of capabilities programming, let's say Python, 2 semesters, there would be some amazing things that would come out of these kids coming into agriculture. So first and foremost, I think every agronomy student should take 2 semesters of programming. The second thing is, you know, when people think of when people think of farmers, they think of, you know, that they're not technically astute. That's so far from the truth. You know, you go meet some of these farmers. You go to a lot of farming operations, and yeah, there's grandpa, and there's, you know, some guy who's 55 years old or older, but there's always like a 20 to 30-year-old who is he's the technical guy, and he is in charge of the GPS, the precision ag. He's in charge of that, and and that person is usually one of the most astute technically astute people you will ever meet. And it's all, you know, they usually have like a 4-year degree, or you know, they went to, you know, the local college, but they're very progressive as well, meaning that they'll adopt technology and bring it in. In terms of policy, education, you know, I think that, and I've always said this, I think that, you know, autonomous vehicles, you know, cars out on the road, I think they're going to drive a lot of the safety issues, and I think that agriculture is going to, they're going to leverage a lot what the autonomous vehicle industry is going to do.
Yeah, thank you. Right in the middle here.
First, I think it's a shame that agronomy wasn't reserved for ag autonomy. But second of all, how are you seeing the future of connectivity out in rural areas? Is it expanded cell network? Is it Iridium, Starlink?
So the question was, how do you think about connectivity in some of our more rural areas?
Okay, you mentioned Iridium. So I did work on Iridium back in 90 through 95. So believe it or not, I made the first iridium phone call. And if you go to Wikipedia, it was not Al Gore, it was me. And it's obvious. It's like Al Gore shows up and he makes, quote, the first phone call. It's not like us engineers tried it first to make sure it worked. So I spent my career in the wireless industry, by the way, and I worked for a lot of all the big name cellular companies out there today. I worked for them. I think LTE. I mean, right now we use LTE for our cellular connectivity. And believe it or not, it's worked great. We use Verizon throughout Iowa and Illinois and Nebraska. Verizon's fairly well covered, and they have the 700 megahertz band. And I do, what's kind of funny is I do monitor RSSI. We actually have heat maps of RSSI. We're monitoring our signal strength. When we're done, we actually, believe it or not, we track that and monitor that really closely. It's worked wonderful for us. Now, moving on, broadband, connectivity to, I think, I don't think Iridium, they don't have high speed or broadband connectivity in that. I think there might be some hope with Starlink. I do have a Starlink modem on order, and despite what Elon knows, I'm probably going to throw it on a tractor to see if it works. I think in at least the U.S., it's kind of different in the U.S. There's fairly well coverage, cellular coverage in the rural areas, and I think, I have a lot of faith that that's going to continue, and and the likes of Verizon and AT&T are going to increase their coverage via cellular, LTE in particular. I don't have a lot of faith in 5G. It's just you get up to the 5 gigahertz, the path loss is way too much for the rural areas. But the 700 and even go up stretch, even the 1900 bands are pretty good in the rural areas. But I think I have a lot of faith that cellular is going to carry us over for the next 5 years. And then when Starlink, that's yet to be proven as to the I guess efficacy of that.
Thank you. And we'll jump to Twitter for our next question here. So from Randy, the question is, what farm operations can be done 24 hours a day autonomously, and will some of these operations still require daylight for operation?
All right, so I can tell you that we have, we've rototilled. We've rototilled 24 hours nonstop, both supervised and unsupervised. We've planted 24 hours. The only issue with planting is, when you can only carry seed for about 6 hours, you have to be out there 4 hours a day, stopping to fill it up. We've tine weeded 24 hours. We've cultivated. So practically everything we've gone over 24 hours. Our biggest stint right now was we went 48 hours with 2 rigs cultivating. Now, there's a couple, when you do it, there's a couple things you realize. Like the 48 hours, I will say we had to stop to fuel it up. So we stop every about 12 hours to fuel it up. And so problem number one, in the fall of 2020, we had enough fuel to run 6 hours. And we did a 37-hour stint. But the problem that we ran into was you have to be out there at midnight, midnight to fuel it up. And then you have to be out there at 6 a.m. in the morning to fuel it up. And that makes a very short night. So the one thing we did was we increased the fuel carrying capability, and I believe the tractor that we're going to have here tomorrow has a 41-gallon tank, so we can go about 20 hours nonstop with that amount of fuel. The other issue was when we plant, if we only have enough seed to carry for about 6 hours, we have to stop and tender it. So that was. So we're already doing that, and it's kind of interesting in the morning to come back out in the field and this thing's still chugging away at a field operation. And the other thing, I guess the last thing that we had, I guess the problem was, if you want to run 24 hours, you have to make sure you have enough land ahead of you. So if you're doing 120 acres in a day in a 24-hour period, that's a fairly good-sized field, and you have to make sure that there's that many acres ahead of us. So we had some 480-acre fields in Nebraska, and that's what we were running on.
Yeah, it's so interesting that the inputs are kind of the limiting factor there. So thank you, Randy, for that question. We'll go to our audience. You, sir, with the dog.
What do you do? Do you also monitor the tractor or any of the equipment? Just to make sure that the seed's coming out properly and stuff like that?
Yeah, so the question was, do you continue to monitor any of the equipment to detect any problems, like making sure the seed is being planted properly?
Yeah, so we started out in 2019 and in the spring of 2020 as well. We were completely and absolutely supervised. For every tractor that we had out in the field, there was an engineer sitting down watching, RPMs, speed, temperature of the tractor, seed population, downforce. They were monitoring it all manually. And then what we did was we started in the spring or over the summer of 2020, and in the fall of 2020, we started adding the capability of when the machine should pause and when it should kill itself. So we have the facilities now. If the temperature of the tractor gets too extreme, we pause. If we have a path plan. If we vary off that path plan by more than, say, 6 inches, we stop. We pause with a path error. If that tractor leaves the geofence, the farm geofence, we put a geofence around that farm. If it gets within 4 meters, it kills the tractor. We monitor speed. We monitor GPS connectivity, or our connectivity, cellular connectivity, or GPS status, RTK status. So there's a whole host of things we monitor, and if any of these, if they don't look right, like, for instance, we're supposed to be going 6 miles an hour, and if we're going 5 miles an hour, something's wrong, and we stop. And we're monitoring everything, population, downforce, margins, and we stop. And then a remote person, we get on our cell phones, we get alerts. We use Slack. Every tractor we have has a Slack channel, and then people they subscribe and they get alerts through Slack, off the shelf.
Thank you. Right up front here, Dana.
So with all of your years of experience, can you tell us a little bit about challenges or successes you've had around venture capital?
So the question was, through some of your different ventures, what have been some of the challenges and I guess good things that has come out of venture capital in your experience?
So this is something I did differently. So I had a company called 640 Labs, and I'll be honest with you, going out fundraising was hard for 2 reasons. Number one, it was the first time that we went out and did VC funding, and the 2 reasons why it was hard was, number one, none of the VCs ever heard of me or ever heard of my co-founder, Corbett. we were just two guys, and they had no idea. They had no history. They had no idea what we were doing or who we are. So I think it was important developing those relationships. You got to start early, and networking and getting people. And there are a lot of well-known people in the Fargo area, and they're well known throughout the VCs in throughout the entire U.S. So get your word, get your name out on the street and develop those relationships early. The second thing was, when you sit across the table from a VC, you have to be audacious. They want to hear something audacious. If you're going out and telling a story that is similar in anything out there that is on the market today, they're not going to view you as being audacious. They look for companies who want to completely and absolutely upend the industry and completely change the industry. So, pardon my French, but go in with a batshit crazy idea, and they will, their ears will perk up.
Thank you, Dana. John.
So as you envision the growth of the company, I was curious, do you look at your existing Midwest footprint, kind of increase the density of your farms there, and then maybe inch your way out? Or does it not really matter? If there's farms in anywhere in North America, can you go right to them?
So the question was, as you think about expansion, do you see the first option as becoming more dense in your operations in the Midwest or spreading more across the U.S.?
So, the correct answer would be, spreading across the U.S. as fast as we possibly can. But the reality is there are so many opportunities here in the Midwest that I am currently, every day I get about five to 10 hits on our website of people are just opportunities here in the Midwest. And, right now I'm focused completely in the Midwest because I'm inundated in the Midwest. There's a lot of, large farmers and organizations that want to, reduce their capital expenses and operating expenses through autonomy. And I'm completely and absolutely inundated here in the Midwest. I would like, I look at the future. I look at, getting out the fresh crop industry. I'm looking at that, and I've talked with, a lot of farmers there on the West Coast, and I will get out there eventually. But right now, I have all the opportunities in the world.
Thank you, John. And we'll go all the way to the left here. That'd be one over.
So what's one struggle or pitfall you've had with your startups, and what's one piece of advice you'd give to an aspiring entrepreneur or small business owner?
So the question was, what is one struggle you've had, and what is one piece of advice you'd be giving to an aspiring entrepreneur?
So the struggle. There was I was on LinkedIn one time, and someone posted, it was called the Pit of Despair, and that every startup goes through. And when you start out any company, every company I started, it was the same thing. It was this is the greatest idea that I've ever seen. This is a lot of fun. We're going to take the world by storm. And then you get into it, and then you figure out as to how hard it is. And, I give the example of taking this little tractor, putting it out in the field, and having this thing attempt to, do some field operation autonomously. I couldn't believe how hard it was. And there was one day, and I'll never forget. It was a defining moment. I went to bed at midnight because we were out in the field trying to plant, a soybean field. And it was, and we came back and I looked and I'm like, oh my God, we spent the entire day and we only got 15 acres done. And I'm like, how in the hell is this ever going to work? And I woke up at 3 o'clock and that was just going through my mind. And I had 3 hours of sleep that night. And I'm like, what in the hell did I just get myself into? So then you go into the pit of despair, and then you start looking at the problems you have. And then, the next day I realized that, our path planning wasn't the greatest. We had a lot of problems with it. We had a lot of problems with connectivity. We had a lot of problems with controlling the damn thing. We had a lot of, but then I thought to myself, well, these are really solvable problems. And then it took us about 6 months to a year to actually solve those problems. And things got incredibly better, the next 6 to 12 months. And, to the point where, we deployed a rototiller and believe it or not, we were watching it all day running. I had a guy monitoring it, and then, he went to sleep, and the next day we woke up, we're looking at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and this thing is still toiling away. And I'm like, oh my God, so things get a lot better. So the other thing too is, if you're, I guess some advice, if you guys want to go out and start a company, do it. There's a lot of people out there that'll back you up. The first company that I started, it was basically a consulting company, and I had 6 years of experience. And when I went out, and I had 2 kids too, and I would question myself the whole time. I'm like, who in the hell thinks you're good enough to go out and actually start a company, and especially to be a consultant? And I was really, I would be awake all night just wondering that, am I good enough to be a consultant? Don't these people have to be incredibly smart? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? But there are a lot of people out there that'll help you, and leverage those people. The world is full of, believe it or not, people like me. So one of the companies I still am a part of, we invest in startups. And there are a lot of people that are, I don't know how to say it, that we're long in the tooth, and we live vicariously through you. So there are a lot of people out there, and a lot of people in this community that will help you get started, and will live vicariously through you, and will help you. And they like to, go to their cocktail parties and say, you should see this company, this startup I'm working with. I mean, that's what they like to do, and they're all over, and they'll help you.
I think that's perfect advice as we jump into our last question here, thinking about how the community can support our entrepreneurs. So we gather here as a community. So what is one thing all of us can do to help energize and support your work, Craig?
Well, you're already doing it. I don't think I've told Greg, and Greg's here somewhere, I think. Okay, so I'm kind of nomadic. I know the startup scene in Chicago. I know the startup scene in Des Moines, Kansas City, St. Louis, Minneapolis, and Ames, and Iowa City, and West Lafayette, and Champaign. And I tell these people that, you guys should see what they're doing in Fargo. I mean, how many people are here? There's maybe, I don't know, 40 people, 50 people here. I've never seen any. I mean, if they did this in Chicago, you'd be lucky to get 10 people. you guys have a thriving startup scene, and there's some really interesting companies. I've been watching Bushel. I watch Apario. I watch all these companies that are in the Fargo area, and a lot of myself and a lot of people I work around, we always refer to Fargo as that magical place called Fargo. So you guys are actually doing some amazing things. So to answer your question, you guys are already doing it. So I mean, just continue it, and you're going to see some incredible companies come out of this area.
Well, thank you so much, Craig. And let's give Craig a big round of applause for coming here to StartupBREW this morning.
That's all we have for this week's StartupBREW Fargo. Thanks for listening in. StartupBREW Fargo is energized by Emerging Prairie, an organization dedicated to connecting and celebrating the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We'd also like to thank the following sponsors for their support: Pro Resources, Brady Mertz, the FMCVB, Office Sign Company, Fargo Parks, and Midco. See you next time.